Hello, I'm Grandmaster Alex Fishbein, and welcome to the Cure for the Common Chess Cold. I'm going to show you a couple of games I played recently, which didn't go very well for me. I made some serious mistakes in those games, mistakes that fit a common pattern. So to speak, they were symptomatic of a larger disease. Then I'm going to show you a specific training method I use to teach myself not to make the same types of mistakes in the future. We could say to cure the disease. Let's dive right in. So both of these games I'm going to show you were played at the U.S. Masters Championship. This was about 2 weeks ago in North Carolina. Very strong tournament. Fabiano Caruana played, which made the tournament extremely attractive to a lot of people. You know, there were almost 300 players, very strong, all of them very strong. And I had a pretty bad tournament. I finished with +1. It's not so much the score itself, but the play. I failed to win a few positions which were winning, and I'm going to show you a couple of games I played and see what I did wrong. So, first game is against Bulgarian woman international master Garigana Pecheva, a very strong player. She's also an FM. Her rating, I think, peaked in the 2300s. And I'm black, and we start out with a Benko Gambit. She played the B6 line. I don't frequently play the Benko, but for this game I decided to play it, just for a change of pace, I guess. And the opening develops more or less normally. She played Knight E2, which is a line I didn't really know very well, kind of a sideline, but I ended up getting a decent position. And around here, I traded the bishop so that, because my potential d5 square is very weak, so I wanted to trade off any piece that can control it. If knight d5, I'm going to take that probably. And I'm pretty happy to sacrifice the pawn on d7. You know, she turned down the Benko sacrifice on move 5, so I'm going to sacrifice it the second time. I have plenty of compensation for that pawn in the open B file. Her pieces are still on the queen side, not having been developed yet. I also am threatening to perhaps penetrate to the first rank or second rank with my rooks along the E file. So the position is already a little bit difficult for white to defend. She has to be very careful. H3, good move. Now I'm able to kind of make her pieces even more passive. And here also she's getting into a little bit of time trouble, so I'm playing kind of quiet moves, waiting moves a little bit, creating some threats from time to time. And pretty soon I'm on the 7th rank. And now she's already down to probably under a minute, maybe 30 seconds or so, plus increment. And here, I actually have a chance to not only regain my pawn, which I sacrificed, but also win another one. I could just play rook takes e4 here. If takes the knight, if the knight moves, I take on b2 and have complete control of the 7th rank, plus a passed c pawn. That's a winning position. If bishop c3, then also rook takes b2. She takes back, that c pawn is going to be very dangerous. So this was actually a more or less an immediate win, but I was so tempted to occupy immediately the 7th rank with both rooks. I just had dreams of some kind of mate, I guess, on the 7th rank or 8th rank. Well, 7th rank for me, 2nd rank for her. That I very quickly played bishop takes d4, which is actually a serious mistake. But, and now after this, the position is actually drawn. White can play rook d1 here, and her d pawn is pretty dangerous. If I try to stop it, she can put her second rook behind it. The best I can do is a perpetual on the 2nd rank. And in this position, even if I could stop that pawn, just trading, the d pawn for the a pawn would be a draw as well because I just have 2 versus 1 left on the king side. So anyway, but that didn't happen. In time trouble, she played d6 quickly. I'm able to create a mate threat like this in the second rank. And now she's not, I can pick off the h3 pawn with the rook, and she's not going to be able to defend the d6 pawn either. So now I have what I want. And it's a winning position. And here's the critical position. So this is the critical position of the game. I have a winning position, and I knew it. You know, the two, when you have 2 pawns versus 1, if the 2 pawns are passed on the side and the kings are on the side of the 2 passed pawns, it's almost always a win, especially when the white rook is ahead of its pawn as opposed to behind it. And there's some drawing positions, but this is not one of them. So for example, if I give rook d1 check, just straight into a rook ending, and I put the rook behind the pawn, the only drawing positions here is where my g pawn is vulnerable to attack. Like if my h pawn was already in g5, h5, there's some potential drawing positions because, you know, especially if the white pawn is more advanced. But here, it's not really close because I can advance the g pawn, and if she plays, for example, a7, and then she ever moves rook h8, I can just take the pawn, and she doesn't even get my h7 pawn. So this would be an easy win. And if she plays, but even if she were able to get the h7 pawn with this, even this position is an easy win. With the g pawn, it's a win as long as the white rook cannot get to the first rank. And I knew that. You know, white, there's a mate threat. White king can't go to the right side because of mate. So, and this is going to be a Lucena position. So basically, this is a pretty easy win. I had a feeling it was a win. I still had some time. I had maybe 4 minutes left or 5 minutes, I think. She had less time by a lot. But you know, I'm the one who has to show the winning method. She just sort of has to respond to my moves. And I was indecisive. I somehow, I sort of calculated the win. I knew that it was winning, but I was a little indecisive, and I didn't go into this ending immediately. I played in this position rook c7, trying to go back to the second rank, which doesn't make sense because I can't really force mate on that second rank. And the you know, the best I can do is still trade rooks. Now it's kind of weird because here, if I'm deciding to trade rooks, I might as well just play rook a2 here. But I repeated moves, and then I played rook a2 in this position, which doesn't actually threaten mate, and gives her the option. I'm almost being a little bit passive-aggressive about, like, do I want to trade rooks or not? Like, I'm almost afraid that she's going to trade rooks. Even though I know it should be a win, kind of giving her the option. She takes the option. And, well, this was my last chance, because then my next move is a terrible blunder. Here I can still win pretty easily. Just trade rooks. We have a similar situation as before. Rook g5 was played instead. It's just a blunder because now rook d7, and I lose my pawn on h7, and now it's just a draw. I missed simply that if I play rook c5, thinking I'm going to checkmate, but then just rook c7. It's very simple, but somehow I missed it. I don't remember how much time I had at this point, probably a little less time at this point, but it must have been more than a minute or two. But after rook d7, it's a draw. I mean, now there's no chances at all. There's no mates. Even my own king could be a little vulnerable in some cases, but the game ended in a draw quickly. And, you know, we agreed to a draw. I think both sides about 30 seconds left. I was pretty out. I was obviously very, very, it's to be honest, it's a little embarrassing to not win a game like this. I mean, I've studied rook endings all my life. I write an article for the American Chess, endgame column for American Chess Magazine. I thought it was a good endgame player. I've had some good endgames in the past. So it's kind of embarrassing, but what can you do? And she was very gracious after the game. You know, she saw that I really should have won. She showed me how I could have won when I said like, yeah, I wasn't sure, but yeah, she just showed me that, even if you just give back the H pawn, the G pawn wins. So she was nice after the game, and that's that. So my next game with Black, ironically, was against one of her friends, another Bulgarian, this time a woman grandmaster, also very strong player. And so let's go to that game. Gabriela Antova. And this time, well, I knew that they were friends, and I figured that she's probably going to prepare for my Benko Gambit, so I wasn't going to play the Benko, but she, didn't want to go there either. So we go into a different opening. King's Indian, kind of play a sideline of the King's Indian here. And I think that I was slightly worse after the opening, but here I had kind of she kind of runs into a positional problem here because bishop takes d5. She can't take with the c pawn, has to take with e pawn, and then I have a nice structure because the dark squares on the queen side can potentially I can occupy the knight. The knight can go to c5, and that's in fact what happens. With a5, I'm going to have dark square control, and then later I'm able to trade. Here I set a nice little trap because if g4 queen d3 is possible, and now rook d1 seems like it traps the queen, but bishop takes b2 actually just wins the game here. So she saw that, of course, but I think she was she slightly panicked here because she played queen c2, and I think she missed that I can just trade bishops, which is very good for me in this endgame, getting rid of her two bishop pair. Now I have some advantage. The knight comes to c5. The bishop on g2 is potentially a bad bishop. It can kind of bump into her own pawns in c4 and d5. And I kind of like, my plan here is maybe to try to penetrate with the king eventually. Maybe if on a good day I can trade rooks. If white's king is not in the center, maybe I can come in through d4 with my king. But how do I actually do that? Well, it's not so easy, and it's not really possible against best defense. She defends well. So here, here, I'm kind of okay with trading knight for bishop because my king is so centralized. Although even that probably would have been a draw. And here, she kind of keeps the king a little bit too far from the center. The king f3 was better, but after king f1, I get this move f4. Now, again, she's in time trouble. She has like a couple minutes left. I have maybe 8 or 10 minutes. So I handled the clock well, but up till now. She makes a mistake. It's difficult to kind of sit in place here, but she could have done that. Now I have a serious advantage. The rook is on her pawns are weak on the king side. My rook can do some damage in her camp, and a further weakness and potential weakness in f3 in some situations. Now, this part of the game, there were some mistakes by both sides. We're both in time trouble. I'm starting to run low a little bit, but still I'm keeping a lead on the clock. Trying to weaken her queenside pawns, maybe pick one of them off. Here, an important move, knight a6, so that I don't take on b4, because then the a3 pawn can kind of get out of the way. Now the a3 pawn is, waiting to be captured by the rook, and she loses both of those queenside pawns. Still, she could have had drawing chances, but by this position, I thought things were looking good. I'm a pawn up. Her king has been forced back to the second rank. Her rook is very passive also. But now f5 is played. And here I have to make a decision, right? She might win her pawn back. I thought it still had a big advantage positionally with the knight versus bishop. But here I have a strong move, which I, surprisingly didn't even consider, and it was knight d3 check. Not a very complicated move. You're supposed to look at all the checks and captures. Well, there's no captures, so here's a check. And this endgame, a pawn up. Now, it's always when you're up a pawn, there's a little bit of a tendency to be kind of afraid of going into a rook ending, because everyone knows that rook endings, like Tarsh said a long time ago, rook endings are always drawn. It's not so much the number of pawns necessarily always that decides the outcome, but the activity of the pieces. But here, my pieces are very active, and it should have been obvious immediately that this rook ending offers me tremendous chances. And it's really an easy win, to be honest. Here's a sample line. Not the only way to win. The white rook and king are both pinned down to the defense of their pawns. Eventually, we're going to... The black king is going to penetrate on the king side. I can trade the b4 pawn for the d5 pawn. The king and the rook together eat up the f3 pawn. It's really not close at all. So that should have been pretty easy to figure out. After rook d3 check, I assume the game wouldn't have lasted very long. Somehow I didn't really look at it. I was kind of enamored with my positional play in the dark squares with my knight. I was thinking, okay, maybe I can get in with a king. I played this really bad move, king f6. And after takes, rook, king e5, I only now realized that if I go king to d4, there's a check, and my king doesn't get very far. If she didn't have that check, then I'd be winning here. So, but I had to play king f4. Then after that, things kind of fall apart for me. The pawns get traded, more pawns get traded. I'm still a pawn up in the end, but now we've traded too many pawns, and I just have a rook and knight pawn versus rook and bishop. That's not going to be enough to win. Even when the bishop is sacrificed for the pawn, it's a draw, rook and knight versus rook. It was drawn, and I played on for another 30 moves or so. So another kind of painful draw. By the way, a lot of times, I was losing games. I only lost one game in this tournament. It was to a much stronger player. But sometimes drawing games when you have winning positions is actually psychologically even more. It's even more painful because, kind of like if you lose a game, you're thinking, well, I had a bad game. Write that off. You don't win a winning position. It's like you didn't have a bad game. You actually had a good game. And in this game, both of these games, I kind of outplayed my opponents pretty well in the middle game, like positionally. I played reasonably well to get to a winning position and then just couldn't convert. So then the question is, what's the common mistake? Is there a common mistake that I made? One good thing about having a bad tournament is a lot of times your mistakes come into much sharper relief. Like it becomes more visible. So in this case, it's pretty obvious. Both times I was not confident of my ability to win the rook ending. The first time, I wasn't sure about the rook ending, the single rook ending. It was a theoretical one. Second time, so I didn't trade into a simpler position. Second time, again, I didn't even look at a trade into a rook ending. So there's some kind of psychological block against going into rook endings or something, maybe. And then I was thinking, okay, so what's the next step? So now I've kind of maybe diagnosed a disease, perhaps, because it happened twice. And I kind of looking back through my games, I probably noticed some other examples of that. Then the next step is to, okay, now that you know where you're going wrong, the next step, now we're getting into the training method. The next step that I use is I try to find examples of similar mistakes made by stronger players to get a sense, and it's good to have literature, to have a lot of books where people write about stuff like this. But in this case, it didn't actually require that, because when I came home after this tournament, just in a couple of days, I was watching the World Championship match, and I noticed that in Game 7 of that match between Gukesh and Ding, Gukesh, actually in a much more complicated situation, made a similar mistake. So here, we pick up the game on move 44. White has just won a pawn, if you may recall, in h6. The rook came back to c6. Now he has a passed h pawn. And the most obvious move is clearly to just push that pawn. But he must have been worried about it exchanging into a rook ending, because black can trade into a rook ending, and it's close. It's much closer than my rook endings were. All right, this is a much higher level kind of thing. And it turns out that actually here, like for instance, if you give black the move, it is a draw. Like if white just does nothing, plays here, black does make a draw. This turns out to be a draw, 3 versus 2 on one side. Difficult for black, but a draw. But it's white to move, and this could have been calculated. you play king f4, and then you play h5. King f4 is, threatens king g5. h5, very important move, the only move to win the game. And now, whatever black does, if black sits, then you just go in and kind of eat this f6 pawn. It's a pretty simple win. If black tries to not to lose that pawn, then the h pawn is very strong. So in both cases, white wins this final position. I think it's clear that it's a winning position. He had to calculate a 7-move variation, much more difficult. Should he be able to calculate this variation? He's spent 5 minutes on this move. I mean, it's not that simple, even for a world champion. So, it's a hard problem sometimes. But it's a very similar type of mistake. He is worried about going into what might be a drawn rook ending. In the game, actually, ironically, it's also possible just to take on e4. It's a little bit harder, but that also wins. Even just going directly into a rook ending wins. He played king e1, and that turns out to be just it may still be a win after this, much more complicated. But now after h4, black has counterplay. That knight that he didn't want to trade is about to create serious damage. And in this position, he played rook c4. He was going to play rook c4. But then he saw that black can play rook h3 with an immediate draw because f3, the rook h1 check. Notice how black's pieces became very active, which could have been avoided by going to that rook ending. And now gives another check, and then if you go king d3, there's mate and 1. So once he saw that you can't do that, he's like, crap, I messed it up. And bishop c2, rook d5, this ended up in a draw. Black just has too much activity. So then I kind of thought about it. It was interesting. I was listening to the commentary, very, very good commentary by the FIDE commentary. And none of the commentators actually, and they're very strong players, none of them looked at, kind of examined these lines. Like they were going to the rook ending. And I thought, there must be a mental block, not just on my side, but like on for a lot of people, kind of a mental reluctance of going into a rook ending, a pawn up, when you have a big advantage. And I was thinking, where does that come from? So I kind of looked through my library and think about, previous games. And I found an old Fischer game, Botvinnik-Fischer game, very famous game, by the way, draw, one of the most famous draws probably. And I'm going to just show you briefly this very complicated ending. This position here, Fischer has this position with black against Botvinnik. This was in 1962. He's a pawn up. He's got a more active position, slightly reminiscent of my second game, the second game that I showed against Antova, maybe. I have a knight on c5. There's some similarities. And so the winning plan here was, as shown by Botvinnik and by further analysts after that, is just to kind of keep the tension, slowly advance. Black tries to trade rooks on b3. If not, then the king could penetrate, kind of play in the dark squares, keep the initiative, right? Instead, he plays knight e4 check, which is a serious mistake. Goes to a rook ending, and this rook ending turns out to be drawn. And I'm just going to show you, this is very complicated. I'm going to show you the main line. Main line goes like this. Both Fischer and Botvinnik analyzed it. You get into a race with white pawns on the king side, racing against black's 2 pawns. Those 2 pawns are kind of slow. And you end up with this situation. Now, if white plays rook h4 here and then queens the pawn, black is going to start with check. So white first kind of drives the black king to a square where the rook will not be able to check the king. So now here, black to move, and rook a3 check is impossible. So Botvinnik concluded that this is a draw, and Fischer said, nope, black should win this anyway. But then that turns out to be wrong also. And then later in 1976, I think Garry Kasparov, a student in Botvinnik's book, found a very beautiful draw here for white with rook c4. Okay, rook b3 check, rook c3. The black rook is now pinned, so you're not going to have queen and rook anymore. You can just have queen ending. That queen ending will be drawn because, the a-pawn is not going to be able to win. And if you trade queens, best black can do is just a drawn king and pawn ending. So that's the main line. In the game, Fischer played a worse move. b5. The game had actually some mutual mistakes here, but it reached this position where b5 was played, and then h5, very strong move, ends up just eliminating that b5 pawn. You can read Bobby's commentaries. He's pretty upset at not winning this game. So it happens. But now it's funny that, and here, by the way, in this ending, it would be a draw even if white just sacrificed the pawn, because this is the Vancouver position. So this game was drawn, but he doesn't have to sacrifice it. This game was drawn, and I think a lot of people, this game is kind of got etched in the imagination of a lot of people. Like, this is a good example of when not to go into a rook ending from being a pawn up. So now the question is, okay, so there's some situations where you do, some situations you don't. How do you train yourself? And then I thought, okay, so now we're getting to the kind of the training method. And the training method that I use mostly is something that has been called solitaire chess for a long time. Bruce Pandolfini has a column in Chess Life called solitaire chess. Basically, you use training mode. And so, okay, there are a couple of different ways to do this. You can do it in Lichess. You could do it in ChessBase. The old school, we used to just do it with a piece. There were no computers. We used to do it with a piece of paper. You set up the board. You have like a book or magazine where the moves are, and you cover the move that's about to be played with a piece of paper. You kind of cover the next move, and you try to guess it. Okay. Now we're using computers for this. So in ChessBase, I use training mode. You put it on training mode. What that does is it just shows you the last move that was played. So it just doesn't show me the next move until I actually play it on the board, until I click the arrow. And so what I do is and I try to simulate a real tournament environment where I set up a real board, I set up a clock, I take what looks like a score sheet with where I'm going to have like one column with the player that I'm trying to. And so first I choose a player that I try to imitate or try to kind of follow, right? And whoever that may be. And then I try to kind of make a little score sheet where there's his moves, there's my moves, and there's opponent's moves. And then, so let's take like an example. I've done many games by Viktor Korchnoi. Viktor Korchnoi was obviously a great endgame player, and he would be a good. And I've done solitaire games with a lot of games for other reasons, not just for endgames, but also for endgames. And he would be a good person to imitate, to learn from. So here's a game. So what I would do is I would have a notebook. I would have 3 columns: Korchnoi, Fishbein. In this case, he's playing Olivier René, a French grandmaster, game from 1989. And we're on move 45. I need to find a move. It's my actually where the first move I start is this one here in this case. Looking at this position, black is attacking the e4 pawn. There are 2 ways to defend: queen e2 and queen c4. Queen c4 goes into a rook ending. I have to decide whether to go into the rook ending or not. Queen e2 looked very tempting because queen e2, and so I put it in training mode so it doesn't show me the next move. Queen e2 is actually the move that I decided to play. The idea is, let's say black puts the rook behind the pawn. Okay. So as in the previous game, white's a pawn up, right? But that pawn in b5 maybe is best used as a decoy. A lot of times that happens. So opening a second front like this and starting an attack is very tempting. And in fact, it win-win in this situation. But black has a defense against queen e2. He can play g6, very, very counterintuitive move, I think. And then if rook c7, then king g7 is possible, but then white can actually force a trade into a queen ending with good winning chances. But even more precise is this move king g8. That's hard to find. And maybe that's why, not seeing that move, maybe that's why I didn't play queen e2. That's why I played queen e2. Now, it turns out that b6 would be a draw. Black rook comes back, and queen g4, black just plays king g7. There really isn't much of an attack. Black has his own threats. And this is actually a drawn position. White's advantage is not enough. But queen e2 was really looked like the right solution. You're opening second front. You're using two sides of the board, but no. Queen c4 is the only move. Fortunately, I played it. I didn't play it. I made a mistake in my training session. I made a mistake. So I write down if I don't make the move that my player plays, then I write down a little X by my move. If I make the right move, I write down a little check mark. After the game, I looked at all the X's and is my move better or worse? Sometimes you don't play the move that the player made doesn't mean it's a mistake. Well, in this case, it was. Rook c5. He understands these rook endings really well. h4 is a very important move. The h pawn is going to try to hold 2 pawns for black. And when black tries to activate, if h5, then f4. Black tried in the game to play king g6, very important move now, f4, preventing any kind of counterplay. And then because if you don't play f4, then let's say you go king f1, then black king starts getting active. Once you play f4, you stabilize the situation on the king side. You play h5. Okay, white pawn there holds 2. White basically has effectively an extra pawn on the queen side and an extra pawn on the king side now, and the game ends very quickly. So very beautiful, beautiful transition to the rook ending. This is exactly the kind of, the kind of skill that I need. And this is one I remembered just from, this made a big impression on me at the time. It's not a very famous game, but it made an impression on me how he, very confidently goes into this rook ending from a pawn up position. So what I did then is I said, okay, maybe the problem is I need to be more confident of rook endings or the transition to the rook ending. And this is where I'm going to do the training. This is where I'm going to take the medicine. Okay, so the the disease is I'm not confident about transitions to the rook ending. I'm hesitant to exchange into winning rook endings, even if that's obviously the only way to win. What's the cure? The cure is to do a bunch of training games. Now, if you're just given that exercise, is that the cure? Because if you're just told, okay, you're given positions where you have to trade, but then you already know that's the exercise. You already know that you're supposed to do that. So that's not really going to work. So what I do with the solitaire chess method, I don't know at any given time where the biggest, you just play the game as if it's a tournament game. You don't know when the important decision will have to be made. And you don't know at any given time whether, if there's a exchange to the rook ending to be made, whether it's win or not. You have to figure it out. If you get a rook ending, you don't know if it's a win or not. It's just like you're basically simulating a real game, but you're training that skill. And what I asked this time is so it's good to have either a friend or a coach to select games for you, because you want to select games that are well-played games. So in this case, I wanted to follow Fabiano Caruana. I knew that, well, first of all, he played in this tournament, so it would be nice if only for a day to play anywhere close to his level, right? So I asked Mitch, my son, who's about 2,300. I gave him a selection of games, just randomly selected games by Fabiano Caruana that went into the endgame. I asked him to select games for me that reached an endgame stage, meaning in this case I asked him, just give me games where both sides have less than 2 pieces left on the board. And good games, where games are not filled with mistakes by Caruana, right? So, and I just played them over using training mode. So I did 3 of these games. I'm going to show you how that went. The first one was against Magnus Carlsen. This is a game from 2013. So Carlsen was, well, he was about to become world champion. Caruana was almost 2,800 also. We reached this position, black to move. This was my starting point. So what Mitch does is he gives me a starting point when you start solving. If you don't have, a friend or a partner who can kind of give you the starting point, you can just play the game from the beginning. If it's a game by a strong player, very likely there'll be a lot of good moves. With Korchnoi, I did that a lot, because I wasn't just interested in the end game. I was interested in all parts of the game. At this point, though, to my knowledge of rook endings, the white king is cut off in the 5th rank. The position looked like it should be winning, and winning pretty easily. But when I actually went and tried to find the win, it was very hard. And in this particular instance, I didn't set any kind of clock limit for myself, so I spent as much time as I needed. And man, it took me a long time to find the win, turned out. So the first step is correct, rook a4, rook b8. Now I have to play king g4. h4 would be a mistake because check and king f5, my king is now walled in on the h file. So king g4, now another possible mistake to be made here is king h3. I avoided that mistake because now again, white plays king f5, and then once you push the pawn, it may look like the white king is just permanently cut off on the upper half of the board. The pawn just goes through, but no, because the rook can give side checks, and the white king is close enough to prevent the black king from kind of escaping those side checks. So that would be a draw. So king f3 is the only move, and now again, rook g4 is a very tempting move, very tempting. You almost make that move automatically, but it's a serious mistake. So rook a8 is a draw. h4 again, the king, now the black rook is kind of hemming in its own king, and the king cannot avoid the side checks. King f5. That's a draw. So king h2 is the only move. Now you can push the pawn for a little bit. Now here, the difference is that now if the rook gives side checks, the king can escape like this. So Carlsen tries one last try, king g5, a very good try. By now I'd already spent probably 30 minutes finding all of this stuff, but I've managed to find the last hard move, rook e4. This is all in my training session. Building a bridge. Now if the side checks are not going to be effective anymore. Black covers it, and after rook e4, now it's bad for white. He tried king f5, rook e2. Here again, the only winning move is rook e2, but now there's a big difference. The king on f5, king on f4, this would not, but king on f5, now it's a win. Although even here you can go wrong if you play king g1. This would be a draw like this. And the black rook cannot go anywhere because of the check on a2. But I managed to find the right move, rook f2 check, and white resigned. The conclusion could be something like this. So bottom line, I was happy here. I was proud of myself for doing this game well. I was able to win this rook ending, which was not nearly as easy as I thought it would be. Then I did a couple more games I want to show you. I actually did quite a lot of games, but I want to show you two that kind of fit the theme, right? So this next one against, also from 2013, against Tomi Nibak, a Finnish grandmaster. So here we go. Okay, we're starting here. White is not yet a pawn up, but white has a very big advantage, obviously. The e7 pawn. There's a very strong temptation here to go into the rook ending. Black's rook is kind of behind, not ahead of its pawn, right? Not where it needs to be. And then white can try to pick off black's pawns on the queen side. The problem is I didn't want to do this because I was afraid of some kind of counterplay starting with rook c8. But the real truth is that c4 starts immediate counterplay, and this would be a draw. Or this would be, I'm not sure it's a draw, but it's complicated rook ending. So I correctly avoided that rook ending. That was a good decision. And I played, looks like maybe the remedy is working. I'm making the right decisions. I did not go into the rook ending here, but I decided at this point once this happened, here I decided to go into the rook ending, which is also a good decision because after takes, now it's a different situation. Here, before this situation, black didn't have to take the a7 pawn. Now white's on the move, and rook c6 prevents any kind of counterplay. And I calculated this line where if you go here, then rook a5 and white queens, and otherwise, if black has to defend passively like this, then white just comes around and takes the b4 pawn, and it's an easy win. So I played queen takes. I played queen takes e7 check. But he didn't do that. Fabi played a different move. Queen f5 check. And now, but okay, so I didn't play queen e7, so I wrote a little X mark there. Okay, fine. Still, it's a winning position. He played the right move here, rook c6. I, in my training, made a very serious mistake here. I played queen d5 check. A different kind of mistake than before. But I kind of like missed the perpetual. Now, for this game, I set up a clock. So I had, you know, by the time I reached this position, I had maybe like 10, 15 minutes to make 5 moves. And in any event, he played the right move, rook c6. But in terms of, and here it's a nice finish. Queen c8 and queen b8, covering all checks on the diagonal. So, but in terms of the transition to the rook ending, I was pretty happy with myself because I got this one right. So now I want to show you one more training position I did. The last one against Gopal, is also, just like previously, a 2600 GM. This was played Caruana as black. I started with this position. For now, black is a pawn down, but that's about to change, obviously. I have a lot of initiative here. I'm going to end up picking up both the queenside pawns if I'm careful. I was tempted to play rook e2 first, but that's a mistake. I've figured that out. So bishop takes b2. That very important move, bishop c3. Keeping the initiative, creating threats. Knight c2, rook e2, knight d4. Picked off both pawns. And the a pawn being especially a dangerous one with the knight, after rook g3, it was very tempting for me not to, so this is the decision point. Do I trade or do I not trade into the rook ending? This is our theme, right? And I thought for a while, and again, I'm playing with a little bit of time pressure here. I gave myself a time limit, so I had only a few minutes to make this decision. And, well, I did not make the right decision, sadly. The cure has not completely worked yet. The disease has not been cured because bishop takes d4 is the right move, and he played it. I played bishop a1. It's very tempting to keep the bishop versus knight in a situation when you have an outside pass pawn. But there's a very important move, knight c6, and white has a lot of counterplay. Picks off the d5 pawn. The a pawn moves very slowly. And this turns out to be white has very, very good drawing chances. Now, why didn't I take on d4? I looked at the rook ending carefully. The two, option number one, you keep the white king cut off in the second rank. You play king f7. And the problem is that you just don't have enough firepower left, and white can draw this any number of ways. White can even play in this position, give a check like this, trade those pawns, and then reach kind of a Vancouver style defense. So, but I figured out. So I didn't want to do that. But then the move rook a5, right, defending the 2 pawns. So on general grounds, I was worried about this, getting into this rook ending a pawn up. The rook seemed kind of passive now. The white king can come in. Rook activity is very important. My king is also not yet very active. But I didn't really calculate variations very carefully. And, I was right about the position being sort of close. I mean, let's say if you actually give white the tempo, then it is a draw. Let's say black plays a silly move like king f8. White can trade off enough material on the king side, and now it's complicated, but it's actually a draw because the king has become active, the rook can become active. But in reality, one tempo is a lifetime in chess, right? So, king f7 is a big difference, right? Now white has to defend the pawn. Now it's black's move, and I think what I missed is that the black rook can very quickly become active, and if white ever plays rook b4, then rook b5 just covers that. So, if white ever tried to activate his rook, then I can cut it off. I think I kind of underestimated that fact. So the white rook is always going to be passive. So once I actually saw this position in the training game, because you get another chance, right? You make a mistake, but you continue the game. Here, from now, I played reasonably well. I mean, here I made a slight mistake. Rook c3, it would have been better to play rook c4, which he did. But rook c3 doesn't spoil it yet. And then by now it's a relatively easy win. Rook f4, important move. The black rook is behind the pawn, and white soon resigned. So, well, what can I say? So I'm working on it. The disease hasn't been cured yet, but I'm taking the medicine. Maybe I'll have to take a booster. Look at more games by either Korchnoi or Caruana, people who are not at all afraid of trading into an ending which they know they can calculate to a win, right? And that's how I'm going to fix this problem. After enough of these games of figuring out situations where the trade is good and bad, but doing this in real life type of trading mode where I'm playing as if I'm playing a real life game and then comparing to what the strong player did using this solitaire chess method, I'm going to be much better at making these decisions. So that's what I wanted to show you. I think next time I might kind of show you an actual live example of how I do this solitaire chess thing, otherwise known as maybe guess the move or, training mode in ChessBase. Actually show you like doing it live. I mean, it's not going to be exactly the same as I actually do it because I can't, when I do it live, I don't talk out. I don't like start talking the moves. And you probably don't want to see me, like you want to wait for 15 minutes while I'm thinking, right? So it's not going to be the exact experience, but it's going to be something close to that. And I hope that, I hope that you've enjoyed this demonstration and and I hope that this has been, that you've learned something as well. And I will see you on this channel soon. Thank you.